A widowed father inherited a forgotten cliffside retreat that hadn't been touched in 40 years, thinking it was just a broken-down property he'd never be able to afford to fix. But hidden beneath the weathered floorboards was a secret lift shaft descending 200 feet into solid rock, and what Marcus discovered at the bottom would turn his desperate life into something he never imagined possible. $310 million in untraceable assets, a deadly protection racket from the 1970s, and powerful men who would do anything to keep it buried. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The alarm on Marcus's phone buzzed at 4:45 in the morning, the same time it had buzzed every weekday for the past 2 years. He reached over and silenced it before it could wake Sophie in the next room. The walls in their apartment were thin, cardboard thin, the kind that let you hear neighbors arguing 3 doors down and feel the bass from the college kids upstairs at midnight. Marcus sat up slowly, his lower back protesting immediately. 38 years old, and he already felt 50. That's what happened when you worked construction during the day and drove for a rideshare service at night, when sleep became a luxury you couldn't afford and your body was just another tool you used until it broke. He stood in the dark, not bothering with the light, and pulled on his work jeans. They smelled like sawdust and sweat, but they were clean enough. His flannel shirt hung on the back of the door, faded blue and fraying at the collar. He buttoned it slowly, his fingers stiff from yesterday's work. They'd been framing a house in the rain, and his hands had gone numb by noon. He flexed them now, feeling the ache deep in the joints. The bathroom mirror showed a man he barely recognized anymore. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble he hadn't had time to shave, hair that needed cutting 3 weeks ago. He splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection. 2 years. It had been 2 years since Emma died, since the car accident on Highway 101 took her away from them. Since the world stopped making sense and everything became about survival, about keeping Sophie fed and clothed and in therapy, about making sure she didn't see him break. He made coffee in the tiny kitchen, the pot sputtering and hissing like it was angry about being awake this early. The apartment was small, barely 600 square feet, but it was what he could afford after the medical bills, after the funeral costs, after the life insurance that hadn't been nearly enough. 1 bedroom for Sophie, the couch for him. It worked. It had to work. At 5:30 he kissed Sophie's forehead as she slept, her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spun gold. She looked so much like Emma, it hurt. 8 years old and already carrying weight no child should have to carry. He left a note on the fridge reminding her that Mrs. Peterson next door would walk her to school, that her lunch was packed, that he loved her more than anything in the world. The construction site was in Lincoln City, 20 minutes down the coast. Marcus arrived as the sun was just starting to think about rising, painting the ocean in shades of grey and silver. His crew was already there, good men who worked hard and didn't ask questions about why he sometimes fell asleep during lunch break. They were building a vacation home for some tech executive from Portland, all glass and steel and views that cost more per square foot than Marcus made in a month. He spent the morning running electrical conduit through 2x6 framing, his drill screaming over the sound of the ocean wind. His shoulders burned, his hands cramped, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Sophie needed new shoes. The rent was due in 5 days. The credit card he'd maxed out for her therapy sessions was sending increasingly aggressive emails. At noon, he ate a sandwich in his truck and checked his phone. 3 therapy appointment reminders for Sophie, 1 overdue utility bill notification, 1 email from Sophie's school about an upcoming field trip that cost $40 he didn't have, and 1 message from a law office he didn't recognize. Subject line: regarding the estate of Raymond Marcus Holloway. He stared at the email for a long moment, his sandwich forgotten. Raymond. He hadn't heard that name in years, maybe ever. He opened it slowly, his thumb leaving a smudge of drywall dust on the screen. Dear Mr. Marcus Holloway, this letter is to inform you that you have been named as the sole beneficiary in the last will and testament of Raymond Marcus Holloway, deceased. Mr. Holloway passed away on October 3rd, and you are hereby requested to contact our office to discuss the distribution of his estate, including real property located at Windward Point, Cascade Head, Oregon. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange a meeting. Marcus read it 3 times. Raymond Marcus Holloway. His middle name was Marcus. That meant this Raymond was probably his father's brother, or maybe his grandfather's brother. He'd never met the man, never even heard his parents mention him. His father had died when Marcus was 12, and his mother had passed 5 years ago. Neither had ever said a word about a Raymond or property on Cascade Head or anything that sounded remotely like an inheritance. He called the number at the bottom of the email. A receptionist answered on the second ring, her voice professional and distant. Holloway and Associates. Yeah, hi, this is Marcus Holloway. I got an email about an estate. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking. Ah, yes, Mr. Holloway. Let me connect you with Mr. Peterson. The hold music was soft jazz, the kind that made you feel like you were in an elevator going nowhere. Then a man's voice, older, tired. Mr. Holloway, thank you for calling. I'm David Peterson. I've been handling your uncle's estate. I didn't know I had an uncle, Marcus said. Peterson sighed. Yes, that's not uncommon. Raymond was quite reclusive. According to our records, he was your paternal grandfather's younger brother, which would make him your great-uncle. He had no children, no spouse, and apparently very little contact with the family. And he left me something? He left you everything, though I should manage your expectations. The estate consists primarily of a single property, a mid-century home built in 1963 on Cascade Head. The place has been abandoned for over 40 years. The structure is likely compromised, access is difficult, and the local municipality considers it more of a liability than an asset. Marcus leaned back against his truck. So it's worthless. Legally, it's yours. Financially, you'd be lucky to get $20,000 for the land, and that's if you can find a buyer willing to deal with the access issues and potential foundation problems. Honestly, my advice would be to sign it over to the county. Let them deal with demolition. Can I see it first? Peterson paused. Of course. I can meet you there tomorrow if you'd like. Say 10 a.m. I'll be there. That night, after another 4-hour shift driving strangers around Newport and listening to them complain about traffic he couldn't control, Marcus sat on the couch and Googled Windward Point. There wasn't much. A few old real estate listings from the 1980s, all marked sold or removed. One faded photograph from what looked like an architectural magazine showing a sleek, modern house perched impossibly on a cliff, all windows and clean lines and dramatic views. The ocean stretched out below it like a living painting. Sophie padded out of her bedroom in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Daddy? Hey, baby, you okay? She climbed onto the couch next to him, curling into his side the way she used to when Emma was alive, when things felt safe. I had a dream about Mummy. Marcus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. His throat tightened. Yeah? Was it a good dream? She was at the beach. She waved at me. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Mummy loved the beach. Are we ever going to live near the beach? Marcus looked at the photo on his phone, the house on the cliff, the impossible view. Maybe, he said quietly. Maybe we are. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to the construction site and picked Sophie up early from school. She sat in the passenger seat of his truck, her backpack at her feet, watching the coastline roll past. They drove north on Highway 101, past Newport and Depot Bay, past the tourist shops selling saltwater taffy and postcards. Where are we going? Sophie asked. To see a house. Are we moving? Marcus glanced at her. I don't know yet, sweetheart. We're just looking. The turn-off for Cascade Head was easy to miss, just a narrow gravel road that cut sharply away from the highway and climbed into the hills. The truck bounced over potholes and ruts, branches scraping against the doors. After 2 miles, the road deteriorated into barely more than a trail, and Marcus started to wonder if Peterson had given him the wrong directions. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. Windward Point sat on the edge of a cliff like it had grown there, like it was part of the rock itself. The house was long and low, built into the hillside with a flat roof and walls made almost entirely of glass. The ocean stretched out beyond it, vast and grey and endless. Marcus pulled the truck to a stop in the overgrown driveway and just stared. "Daddy," Sophie whispered, "it's like a castle." A silver Lexus was already parked near the entrance, and David Peterson stood beside it, checking his watch. He was in his 60s, thin and grey, wearing a suit that looked out of place against the wild coastal landscape. He waved as Marcus and Sophie climbed out of the truck. "Mr. Holloway, good to see you." Peterson shook Marcus's hand, then smiled down at Sophie. "And who's this?" "My daughter Sophie." "Well, Sophie, what do you think?" Sophie was already walking toward the house, her eyes wide. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen." Peterson pulled a keyring from his pocket, old brass keys that looked like they belonged in a museum. "The property is just over 3 acres, most of it unbuildable due to the cliff face. The house itself is approximately 2,000 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. It was considered quite cutting edge when it was built, very modern for 1963. He unlocked the front door, which stuck before finally swinging open with a groan. The smell hit them immediately, musty and stale, but not rotted, not dead. The interior was dim, dust coating every surface like snow. But as Marcus's eyes adjusted, he saw something remarkable. The furniture was still there, mid-century modern pieces covered in sheets. The kitchen appliances, vintage but intact. Even art on the walls, abstract paintings in faded colors. Sophie ran ahead, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. "Daddy, look, you can see forever!" The back wall of the house was entirely glass, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. Waves crashed against rocks 200 feet below, sending up plumes of white spray. The view was breathtaking, the kind of thing people paid millions for in California. Peterson walked through the rooms with Marcus, pointing out problems. "You can see water damage here in the corner, likely roof leaks. The electrical is probably not up to code. Plumbing hasn't been used in decades, and there's the question of the foundation. This whole cliff face is unstable sandstone. Houses like this, they don't age well." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was watching Sophie press her hands against the glass, watching her smile for the first time in months, really smile. And he was imagining something he hadn't let himself imagine since Emma died. A home, a real home. "Why did he leave?" Marcus asked. "Raymond. Why would anyone abandon this?" Peterson's expression shifted, something cautious entering his eyes. "That's a question I can't answer. Raymond disappeared in 1979, simply walked away and never came back. The property has been in legal limbo ever since, tied up in trusts and taxes. It's only now, with his confirmed death, that we can finally settle the estate." "Disappeared? What do you mean, disappeared?" "I mean no one knows what happened to him, Mr. Holloway. He was here one day, gone the next. Some people in town thought he'd died. Others thought he'd run off. There were rumors, but nothing concrete." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of rumors? Peterson shifted his briefcase from one hand to the other. "Small town talk. You know how it is. People said Raymond was involved in something shady, that he'd made enemies, but there was never any proof, never any investigation. He just became one of those unsolved mysteries people eventually stopped talking about." Sophie's voice called from another room. "Daddy, come look at this bedroom. It has a window seat." Marcus looked at Peterson. "What would you do?" The lawyer sighed. "Honestly, I'd sell the land and walk away. This place, it's got a history, and not the kind that adds value." That night, Marcus and Sophie ate dinner at a small diner in Lincoln City called the Lighthouse. It was the kind of place with plastic menus and waitresses who'd worked there for 30 years. They ordered burgers and fries, and Sophie drew pictures on her paper placemat with the crayons the hostess had given her. "Can we live there?" Sophie asked, not looking up from her drawing. Marcus took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and lukewarm. "I don't know, baby. It needs a lot of work." "But it's by the ocean." "It is. Mommy would have loved it." Marcus's throat tightened. He reached across the table and took Sophie's hand. Yeah, she would have. Around them, the diner hummed with quiet conversation, but Marcus noticed something odd. People were glancing their way, not rudely, but with a kind of cautious curiosity. An older couple in the corner booth whispered to each other while looking in their direction. The waitress refilling coffee at the counter kept stealing looks. Then a man approached their table. He was probably 70, weathered and lean, wearing a faded denim jacket and a baseball cap from a fishing charter. His eyes were sharp, assessing. "You're the Holloway boy," he said. It wasn't a question. Marcus looked up. "Yeah, that's me." The man pulled out the empty chair at their table without asking and sat down heavily. Up close, Marcus could see the lines etched deep in his face, the way his hands shook slightly as he placed them on the table. "Name's Carl Dietrich. I've lived in this town 62 years, and I knew your Uncle Raymond." "Okay," Marcus said slowly, aware of Sophie listening to every word. Carl leaned in, his voice dropping low. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. Leave that place alone." "Excuse me?" "Windward Point, that house. Whatever you're thinking about doing with it, don't. Sell it, burn it down, I don't care. But don't move in there. Don't go poking around." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Why not?" Carl's eyes flicked to Sophie, then back to Marcus. Because Raymond wasn't hiding from the world for no reason. He was protecting something, and people who get too curious about what he was protecting, they tend to have accidents. "That sounds like a threat." "It's a warning," Carl said. "There's a difference. Your uncle was a good man who got mixed up in bad business. He spent 40 years making sure that business stayed buried. Now he's gone, and you're here, and there are people who don't want anyone digging around that property." "What people?" Carl stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "The kind who don't leave witnesses. Think about your girl there. Think about what's more important, an old house or her safety." He walked out without another word. The diner had gone quiet. Marcus could feel everyone pretending not to listen. He dropped a 20 on the table and took Sophie's hand. "Come on, baby, let's go." They drove back to their apartment in silence, Sophie dozing against the window. But Marcus's mind was racing. Every instinct told him to listen to Carl, to walk away from Windward Point and its shadows and its secrets. He had Sophie to think about. He couldn't afford to take risks, couldn't afford to chase mysteries. But then he thought about their apartment, with its thin walls and broken heater. Thought about working 2 jobs and still falling behind. Thought about Sophie's face when she'd looked out those windows at the ocean, the first real joy he'd seen in her eyes since her mother died. And he thought about something else too, about the way Carl had looked at him, with pity and fear, about the way the whole diner had watched them, about the fact that Raymond had lived there for years, alone, protecting something. Protecting what? Marcus carried Sophie inside and tucked her into bed. She mumbled something about the window seat and the ocean, already half asleep. He kissed her forehead and closed the door quietly behind him. Back on the couch, he opened his laptop and started searching. Raymond Marcus Holloway. The results were sparse, just a few old phone listings and a death certificate filed 3 months ago. Cause of death, natural causes. Age, 96. He tried different searches, Windward Point Cascade Head. Accidents, Cascade Head, Oregon. Missing persons, Lincoln City, 1970s. That last one brought up something interesting. A newspaper article from the Lincoln City Sentinel, dated August 1978. Local businessman reported missing. The photo was grainy, but Marcus could make out a man in his 40s standing in front of a car dealership. The article was brief. Thomas Sullivan, owner of Sullivan Automotive, hadn't been seen in 3 days. His car was found abandoned near Cascade Head. No signs of foul play. Investigation ongoing. Marcus clicked to the next page. Another article 6 months later. Sullivan case closed, presumed accidental death. Body never recovered. He kept searching. Over the next 2 hours, he found 4 more cases, all men. All between 1976 and 1982. All last seen near Cascade Head. All presumed dead, bodies never found. He sat back, his heart pounding. 5 men, 5 disappearances, and Windward Point sat right in the middle of it all. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "We saw you." Marcus stared at the screen, his blood running cold. He walked to the window and looked down at the parking lot. A black SUV sat in the corner, its engine running, windows tinted dark. As he watched, it pulled out slowly and drove away, its headlights cutting through the darkness. He checked the locks on the door, checked Sophie's window. Then he sat on the couch with his phone in his hand, watching the street below, and didn't sleep at all. Because Marcus Holloway had just inherited more than a house. He'd inherited a secret. And somewhere out there, people were watching. People who wanted to make sure that secret stayed buried. People who'd already made 5 men disappear, and now they knew exactly where he lived. The next morning, exhausted and wired on too much coffee, Marcus made a decision. He called David Peterson and told him he wanted to keep the property. The lawyer tried to talk him out of it, citing structural concerns and the cost of repairs. But Marcus didn't budge. He signed the papers that afternoon at Peterson's office, a dusty suite above a real estate agency that smelled like old carpet and desperation. When he walked out, he held the deed to Windward Point in his hand and a knot of fear in his gut. But he also held something else. Hope. For the first time in 2 years, he saw a path forward that wasn't just about surviving day to day. Whatever Raymond had been protecting, whatever secrets lay buried in that house on the cliff, Marcus would face them. Because running had never solved anything. And Sophie deserved better than a life spent looking over their shoulders, cramped in an apartment where dreams went to die. That evening, he sat Sophie down and told her they were moving to the beach house. Her face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds, and in that moment, Marcus knew he'd made the right choice. Even if danger was waiting, even if powerful people wanted him gone, even if the black SUV came back. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't moving forward into the unknown. It's staying stuck in a present that's slowly crushing you. And Marcus Holloway had spent 2 years being crushed. Now it was time to build something new, or discover what was hidden beneath the old. The truth was waiting at Windward Point, and one way or another, he was going to find it. Moving day came on a grey Saturday morning, the kind where the ocean mist hung so thick you couldn't tell where the water ended and the sky began. Marcus loaded everything they owned into his truck and a borrowed trailer in less than 3 hours. 2 years in that apartment, and their entire life fit into one trip. Clothes, Sophie's toys, the bed that had been Emma's, a few boxes of photographs and memories he couldn't bear to throw away. That was it. That was all they had. Sophie sat in the passenger seat clutching her stuffed elephant, the one Emma had given her for her 6th birthday. She'd barely put it down since the accident. Marcus understood. Some things you held on to because letting go meant admitting they were really gone. The drive up to Windward Point felt different this time. The narrow gravel road seemed less threatening, more like a passage into something new. When the house came into view, perched on its cliff with the Pacific churning below, Sophie pressed her face to the window and whispered, "We're home." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Home. He'd almost forgotten what that word meant. They spent the first week cleaning. Dust had settled into every corner, every crevice, coating the mid-century furniture like ancient snow. But beneath the neglect, the house was solid. The floors were teak, barely scratched. The walls were cedar, rich and aromatic once Marcus wiped them down. The massive windows were intact, their seals still good after 60 years. Raymond had built this place to last. Sophie claimed the bedroom with the window seat, the one overlooking the ocean. Marcus set up her bed and helped her arrange her toys on the built-in shelves. She'd brought her markers and spent an entire afternoon drawing pictures of whales and seabirds, taping them to the walls. For the first time since Emma died, she seemed like a kid again. Lighter, happier. Marcus took the master bedroom at the other end of the house. It was sparse, just a bed frame and a dresser that had belonged to Raymond. The closet still held a few of his uncle's clothes, button-down shirts and slacks from the 1970s, perfectly preserved. Marcus left them there. Somehow it felt wrong to throw them away, like erasing the last traces of a man he'd never known but was beginning to understand. The kitchen was a time capsule. Avocado green appliances, Formica countertops, cabinets with brass pulls shaped like starbursts. The refrigerator still ran, humming quietly to itself after 4 decades of waiting. Marcus stocked it with groceries from the town market. Simple things. Bread, milk, eggs, peanut butter. They ate dinner that first night at the small dining table, looking out at the sunset, painting the ocean in shades of amber and gold. "Daddy," Sophie said, her mouth full of grilled cheese. Why did Uncle Raymond leave this place? Marcus had been asking himself the same question. "I don't know, baby. Sometimes people have reasons we can't understand." Was he sad? Maybe. Or maybe he was protecting something. Sophie thought about this, swinging her legs under the table. "Like how you protect me." "Yeah," Marcus said softly. "Exactly like that." By the second week, Marcus had started serious renovation work. He'd taken a leave of absence from the construction job, burning through what little savings he had left, but he needed to make the house livable. The roof had minor leaks he patched with tar and shingles. The bathroom plumbing needed new washers. He rewired the outlets in the living room, replaced broken light fixtures, sanded and refinished the front door. Sophie helped where she could, handing him tools, holding the flashlight, keeping him company. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've survived something terrible together. Sometimes Marcus would catch her staring out at the ocean with a faraway look in her eyes, and he knew she was thinking about Emma, about the mum who should have been there to see this, to help them build this new life. It was during the 3rd week, while Marcus was working on the living room, that Sophie made the discovery. She'd been playing behind the built-in bookshelf that dominated the north wall, running her toy cars along the baseboards and making engine noises. Suddenly she stopped. "Daddy, there's a crack here." Marcus looked up from the floorboard he was replacing. "What kind of crack?" "A big one, like a door." He set down his hammer and walked over. Sophie was right. Behind the bookshelf, barely visible in the shadows, was a seam in the wood paneling. It ran floor to ceiling, perfectly straight, too precise to be accidental. Marcus ran his fingers along it, feeling for a latch or handle. Nothing. "Help me move this," he said. Together, they pulled the bookshelf away from the wall. It was heavy, solid walnut, but it slid easier than Marcus expected, almost like it had been designed to move. With the shelf out of the way, the seam became obvious. It wasn't a crack. It was a door, concealed so perfectly in the paneling that you'd never notice it unless you were looking. Marcus's heart started to pound. He traced the edges, found what looked like a keyhole at waist height. It was old-fashioned, the kind that took a skeleton key. He thought about the keys David Peterson had given him, the brass ring with a dozen different keys, most of which he hadn't identified yet. "Stay here," he told Sophie. He went to the master bedroom and found the keyring in Raymond's dresser. Back in the living room, he tried them one by one. The fifth key slid into the lock like it had been waiting 60 years for this exact moment. Marcus turned it. Something inside the wall clicked, deep and mechanical. The door shifted inward an inch. Marcus pushed it open slowly. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of concrete and machine oil. Behind the door was darkness, absolute and waiting. He fumbled for his phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped through. What he saw made him freeze. It wasn't a room. It was a shaft. An industrial elevator shaft, cutting straight down into solid rock. Steel cables hung in the center, disappearing into darkness below. On the left side was a control panel, surprisingly modern, with buttons and an LED display that glowed faintly green. On the right was a service elevator, just a platform with railings, the kind used in mines or construction sites. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice came from behind him, small and uncertain. "Don't come in here," Marcus said quickly. "Stay in the living room, okay?" "What is it?" "I don't know yet." He stepped onto the platform, testing its weight. Solid. The cables looked well maintained, the machinery clean. Someone had been taking care of this, recently. He pressed the button marked down. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the platform shuddered, and with a mechanical hum it began to descend. Marcus watched the wall slide past, rough stone carved out of the cliff face. His phone's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness below. Down and down the platform went, 50 feet, 100, more. The temperature dropped with each foot, his breath misting in the cold air. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 2 minutes, the platform jerked to a stop. The space before him was massive. A chamber carved out of living rock, easily 60 feet across and 20 feet high. The ceiling was reinforced with steel beams. The floor was poured concrete, smooth and level, and running along the walls were rows and rows of storage containers, the kind used by banks and military installations. Industrial shelving held what looked like safety deposit boxes, hundreds of them. In the center of the room sat a desk, a filing cabinet, and a leather chair that looked like it belonged in a corporate office. But it was the lighting that stopped Marcus cold. The entire space was lit by fluorescent tubes, humming softly overhead. Power. There was power down here, which meant this place was still active, still maintained, still waiting. He stepped off the platform on legs that didn't quite feel steady. His footsteps echoed off stone as he approached the nearest storage container. It was labeled with a number, 001, and had a combination lock. Marcus tried the lock. It didn't budge. He moved to the next container. Same thing. The third one, 003, had a different lock, keyed rather than combination. On a hunch, Marcus tried the brass key ring. The 8th key fit. The lock clicked open. Marcus pulled the heavy door wide. Inside were boxes. Banker's boxes, the kind used for documents. He pulled one out, set it on the floor, and opened it. His hands started shaking before his brain fully processed what he was seeing. Bonds. Bearer bonds, the kind that could be cashed by anyone holding them. Stacks of them, in denominations of $10,000 each. He grabbed another box. More bonds, mixed with stock certificates from companies he recognized. General Electric, IBM, Exxon. All dated from the 1970s. All in perfect condition. Marcus sat back on his heels, his breath coming fast and shallow. He opened another container. Gold certificates, rare coins in protective cases, bundles of cash, old bills wrapped in plastic. He moved to another container, this one unlocked. Inside were more boxes, but these held jewelry. Diamonds, emeralds, watches that probably cost more than his truck. He stumbled to the desk, his mind reeling. There had to be millions down here, tens of millions, maybe more. He grabbed the filing cabinet and yanked open the top drawer. Inside were ledgers, the old-fashioned kind with graph paper and handwritten entries. He pulled one out and flipped it open. The first page was dated March 1976. Columns of numbers, dates, and cryptic notes. Received from SM 50,000, deposited container 12. Received from DR 120,000, bonds and gold, container 18. The entries went on for pages. Years of deposits, all meticulously recorded. At the back of the ledger was a summary sheet. Marcus's eyes scanned down to the total at the bottom. His vision blurred. He blinked, read it again. $310,400,000. Estimated current value. Updated January 2019. Marcus sat down hard in the leather chair. $310 million. Sitting in a vault 200 feet beneath a house he'd inherited from a man he'd never met. Hidden for 40 years. Maintained, protected, waiting. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the ledger. He set it down and forced himself to breathe. Think. He needed to think. This wasn't inheritance. This couldn't be legal. You didn't hide $300 million in a secret vault unless it was dirty, unless it was dangerous. He stood and walked the perimeter of the chamber, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. At the far end, behind the storage containers, he found a smaller room carved into the rock. It was set up like an office. Desk, lamp, telephone, even a small cot. The walls were lined with more filing cabinets. On the desk was a leather journal. Marcus picked it up, his fingers leaving prints in the dust on the cover. He opened it to the first page. March 15, 1978. They came to me today. 3 men in expensive suits driving a Cadillac that cost more than my house. They sat in my living room and explained very politely that I had a choice. Help them or disappear like the others. I chose to live. Marcus sank into the desk chair and kept reading. What happens next will turn this discovery into something far more dangerous than Marcus could imagine. Reveal truths about his uncle that will challenge everything he thought he knew and force him to make a choice that could save his daughter or cost them both their lives. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The journal entries were methodical, detached, like Raymond was documenting evidence rather than living through it. Marcus read page after page, his stomach knotting tighter with each revelation. March 20, 1978. They want me to build them a vault, not just any vault, something that can hide millions in assets beyond the reach of federal investigators. They've chosen this location because of the cliff, the isolation, the fact that no one would ever think to look here. They're paying me $200,000 and promising me my life. I don't believe them about the second part. April 3, 1978. Construction has begun. They brought in a crew from out of state, men who don't ask questions. The work is progressing faster than I expected. They're using mining equipment to carve the chamber, reinforcing it with steel beams trucked in during the night. My neighbors think I'm adding a basement wine cellar. If they only knew. May 18, 1978. The vault is complete, climate-controlled, secure, accessible only through the elevator shaft I designed myself. They've started moving assets in. I've never seen so much money in one place. Bonds, gold, certificates, cash. All of it stolen, laundered, or extorted. I'm an accountant. I know dirty money when I see it. And this is the dirtiest I've ever encountered. June 2nd, 1978. They explained the arrangement. I'm to be the guardian, the keeper. No one else knows this location except the 5 men at the top. If they need to access the funds, they'll contact me with a code phrase. If I tell anyone, if I try to run, if I even think about betraying them, they'll kill me. Then they showed me photos of Thomas Sullivan, the car dealer who disappeared last year. They wanted me to understand what happened to people who didn't cooperate. Message received. Marcus flipped ahead, scanning years of entries. Raymond's handwriting became shakier over time, but his discipline never wavered. He recorded every deposit, every withdrawal, every interaction. By 1982, the vault held over 200 million in assets. By 1990, it had grown to 280 million. The money was growing, compounding, turning into something obscene. But the most interesting entries were from the late 1990s and early 2000s. November 12, 1998. Carlo died today. Heart attack. He was the last of the original 5 who knew about this place. His sons don't know. The organization has fractured, gone legitimate in some ways, but they've forgotten about this vault, forgotten about me. I've become invisible, a ghost guarding treasure no one remembers exists. January 3rd, 2003. I'm 71 years old. I've spent 25 years in this house, alone, protecting something that may never be claimed. Sometimes I wonder if I should just call the FBI, turn it all over, let them sort it out. But then I think about the photos, about Sullivan, about what these men are capable of even now. So I wait. October 9th, 2015. I've made a decision. When I die, this will go to family. I have no children, no close relatives except one great-nephew I've never met. Marcus. His father, my nephew Jonathan, was a good man, died too young. Maybe Marcus is the same. Maybe he'll know what to do with this burden. Maybe he'll be brave enough to do what I never could. The final entry was dated September 28, just 2 months ago. Whoever you are reading this, you've found what I've protected for 40 years. $310 million in untraceable assets stolen from criminals, hidden from the world. I've spent my entire life as their prisoner, even after they forgot I existed. I could have run, could have exposed them, but fear is a powerful cage. You have a choice now. Keep it, use it, turn it over to authorities. Whatever you decide, know this. There are still people out there who remember. Not many, but enough. If they find out you've discovered this place, they'll come, and they won't be polite about it. Be careful, be smart, and do what I never had the courage to do. Use this for something good. Raymond Marcus Holloway. Marcus closed the journal and sat in the darkness for a long time. His mind was spinning, trying to process everything he'd read. Raymond had been a prisoner in his own home for 4 decades, guarding stolen money for criminals who eventually forgot about him. And now that burden had passed to Marcus, along with $310 million and a target on his back. He thought about Sophie upstairs, probably wondering where he'd gone. Thought about the black SUV that had followed them, about Carl's warning at the diner, about the 5 men who disappeared near this property between 1976 and 1982. Suddenly, those disappearances made sense. They weren't random, they were warnings, messages sent to Raymond and anyone else who might get curious. Marcus stood and walked back to the main chamber. He moved between the containers, opening those that weren't locked, confirming what the ledgers said. Bonds, securities, gold, cash, jewelry. Enough wealth to set up Sophie for life, to give her everything Emma would have wanted for her. College, security, opportunities. He could take it, walk away, disappear somewhere the organization, whoever they were, would never find them. But he could also hear Emma's voice in his head, the way she used to talk about doing the right thing even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. She'd been a teacher, devoted to helping kids nobody else believed in. She'd chosen a life of service over comfort. And she'd taught Marcus that some things mattered more than safety. Things like integrity, like justice. He picked up one of the bearer bonds, turned it over in his hands. $10,000. Just one bond. The container held hundreds of them, and there were dozens of containers. The money was so vast it had stopped meaning anything. It was just numbers now. Abstract, inhuman. Marcus put the bond back and locked the container. He gathered the journal and one of the ledgers, tucked them under his arm, and walked back to the elevator. As the platform rose toward the surface, carrying him up through 200 feet of carved stone, he tried to figure out what he was going to do. But all he could think about was Sophie, about keeping her safe, about the men who might already be watching. The elevator reached the top. Marcus stepped back into the living room, closing the hidden door behind him. Late afternoon light streamed through the massive windows. He could hear Sophie in her room, humming to herself. The sound was so normal, so innocent, that it made his chest ache. He hid the journal and ledger in his bedroom, buried them in the back of the closet behind Raymond's old clothes. Then he washed his hands and face, trying to scrub away the cold vault air, the smell of old paper and secrets. "Daddy?" Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Where did you go?" Marcus managed to smile. "Just checking out the basement. Nothing interesting." She studied him with those two observant eyes. 8 years old and already learning to read lies. "You look scared." "I'm not scared, baby. Just tired." She came over and hugged him, her small arms barely reaching around his waist. "It's okay to be scared sometimes. Mommy told me that. She said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do it anyway." Marcus held her close, fighting back tears. Mommy was right about a lot of things. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus sat on the couch in the dark and watched the ocean. Moonlight turned the waves silver, beautiful and cold. He thought about everything Raymond had written, about 40 years spent as a prisoner, about money that had cost so many people their lives, about the choice he now faced. Around midnight he saw them, lights at the end of the driveway. He stood and moved to the window, staying in the shadows. A car was parked just beyond the property line, engine running. As he watched, 3 figures got out and walked onto his land. They moved slowly, methodically, like they were surveying the property, checking sight lines, planning something. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the security camera app he'd installed just last week. Cheap cameras from the hardware store, but they worked. The feed showed the 3 men clearly now. 2 were large, built like they spent serious time in the gym. The third was smaller, wearing a suit despite the late hour. They walked the perimeter of the house, never coming too close, never trying the doors, just looking, learning, marking territory. After 20 minutes, they returned to their car and drove away. But Marcus knew they'd be back. They were assessing him, deciding how to handle the situation, deciding whether he was a threat or just an idiot who'd stumbled onto something he didn't understand. He needed help, needed to tell someone. But who? The police? And say what? That he'd found 300 million in stolen assets under his house? They'd arrest him, investigate him, tie everything up in legal proceedings that could take years. The FBI? Maybe, but Raymond's journal had made it clear some of these people had connections everywhere. Cops, judges, politicians. Marcus couldn't trust the system, not yet. Not until he understood what he was dealing with. The next morning, exhausted and jittery from too much coffee, Marcus drove Sophie to school. He watched the rear-view mirror the entire way, checking for tails. Saw nothing, but that didn't mean they weren't there. He walked her to the classroom door, hugged her longer than usual. "Daddy, you're acting weird," she said, pulling away with an embarrassed smile. "Sorry, baby. Just love you, that's all." "Love you too, even when you're weird." He watched her disappear into the classroom, then stood in the hallway for a long moment. Other parents rushed past, checking phones, discussing carpools. Normal people living normal lives. Marcus envied them so much it hurt. Back at Windward Point, he made a decision. He returned to the vault, spent 4 hours photographing everything. The containers, the ledgers, the journal entries, every bond, every certificate, every piece of evidence Raymond had kept. He uploaded it all to 3 different cloud storage accounts, sent encrypted copies to email addresses he created just for this purpose. If something happened to him, if they came for him like they'd come for Sullivan and the others, at least the truth wouldn't die with him. Then he started researching. Carlo, the name Raymond had mentioned in the journal. After hours of digging through old newspaper archives, he found him. Carlo Benedetti died 1998, former businessman with alleged ties to organized crime. His obituary mentioned surviving sons, Michael and Anthony, both now legitimate businessmen, one in real estate development, one in waste management, both with addresses in Portland. Marcus kept digging, the other names from Raymond's ledgers, initials, code names, dates. Slowly a picture emerged. This wasn't just local crime, this was bigger, interstate, maybe international, the kind of operation that had tentacles reaching into governments and corporations, the kind that didn't just disappear because the original players died. It evolved, adapted, survived. And somewhere in that evolved organization, someone had remembered Windward Point, remembered Raymond, and now they were watching Marcus, waiting to see what he'd do, whether he'd keep quiet like Raymond had, or whether he'd become another problem that needed solving. Marcus sat at Raymond's desk in the vault, surrounded by 310 million reasons to run and one 8-year-old reason to stay. The weight of the choice pressed down on him like the 200 feet of stone above his head. He thought about Emma, about what she would have done, and he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, exactly what came next. He wasn't running. He wasn't keeping quiet. He was going to expose everything. All of it. The money, the crimes, the decades of cover-ups and murders. But he needed to be smart about it. Strategic. Because he wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was protecting Sophie. And that changed everything. As he rode the elevator back up to the house, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Fear was still there, sharp and cold. But something else had joined it. Anger, determination, maybe even purpose. Raymond had spent 40 years trapped by his choices. Marcus wouldn't make the same mistake. This ended now. One way or another, the secrets buried beneath Windward Point were coming into the light. Marcus lasted 3 days before they came to the door. 3 days of watching the security cameras, jumping at every sound, barely sleeping. 3 days of pretending everything was normal when he dropped Sophie at school, smiling at teachers while his gut churned with fear. 3 days of photographing more evidence, backing up files, preparing for what he knew was inevitable. They arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Sophie was at school. Marcus was replacing a broken window seal in the kitchen when he heard tires on gravel. He looked up and saw a black Mercedes pulling into the driveway, sleek and expensive, the kind of car that didn't belong on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. A man stepped out, mid-50s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, never being questioned, never being afraid. Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans and walked to the front door. He opened it before the man could knock. "Mr. Holloway," the man said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "My name is Richard Westwood. I wonder if we might have a conversation." "About what?" "About this property, about your recent inheritance. May I come in?" Every instinct told Marcus to slam the door, call the police, run. But he knew that would only make things worse. These people didn't respond well to panic, so he stepped aside and let Richard Westwood walk into his home. They sat in the living room, Marcus on the couch, Westwood in the mid-century chair that had belonged to Raymond. The man looked around, taking in the renovations, the personal touches, Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway. "You've done nice work with the place," Westwood said. "Raymond would have appreciated it. He loved this house." "You knew my uncle?" "Let's say I knew of him. Raymond was quite the solitary figure, but he had his connections, his responsibilities." Marcus's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" Westwood's smile never wavered. "To make this simple for everyone involved, you've inherited a property that holds certain significance to associates of mine. We'd like to purchase it from you. We're prepared to offer $50,000. Cash, no questions asked. You and your daughter could find a lovely apartment in town, maybe even buy a small house. Start fresh. The property isn't for sale. Mr. Holloway, I don't think you understand the situation. I understand perfectly. You're here because you think Raymond left something valuable, and you want me gone so you can take it. Westwood's expression hardened, the pleasant mask slipping. What I want is to make this easy. What my associates want is to ensure certain arrangements remain undisturbed. Raymond understood this. He lived a quiet life because he chose cooperation over confrontation. Raymond was a prisoner. Raymond was protected, Westwood corrected, his voice sharp now. People who tried to interfere with his arrangement, they didn't fare well. I assume you've heard about Thomas Sullivan, or perhaps Jerry MacDonald, or David Chen? Marcus felt his blood run cold. David Chen. He'd found that name in the old newspaper archives. Disappeared in 1981. Westwood leaned forward. Those men made poor choices. They asked questions, investigated matters that didn't concern them, threatened exposures that would have been inconvenient. They're not asking questions anymore. That sounds like a threat. It's a history lesson, Mr. Holloway, and an opportunity. Take the 50,000, walk away, think about your daughter. What's her name? Sophie, 8 years old, attends Lincoln Elementary, loves art class. Cute kid. Marcus was on his feet before he realized he'd moved, his fists clenched. Don't you dare! Sit down, Westwood said calmly. I'm not threatening your daughter. I'm reminding you that children need their parents, and parents need to make smart decisions. Marcus stayed standing, his heart hammering. Get out of my house. Westwood stood slowly, adjusting his cufflinks. You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, my associates become less patient, less generous. We've invested considerable time and resources into maintaining certain arrangements. We don't appreciate disruption. He walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. Don't bother contacting law enforcement. Half the sheriff's department in this county has been on our payroll since the 1980s. The FBI. By the time they investigate, authenticate, process everything through proper channels, well, accidents happen, especially to single fathers raising young daughters near dangerous cliffs. He left, the Mercedes pulling away smoothly, like the entire conversation had never happened. Marcus locked the door and leaned against it, his hands shaking. Sophie. They'd mentioned Sophie by name, knew her school, her class, her age. They'd been watching, studying, preparing, and now Marcus had 48 hours to decide whether to protect his daughter or expose the truth. There was no decision. Sophie came first. Always. But as he stood there, trying to control his breathing, trying to think, he realized something. Westwood had made a mistake. He'd shown his hand too early, revealed how much they knew, how much they feared exposure. They wouldn't have come if they weren't worried. Which meant Marcus had power. He just needed to figure out how to use it. He called David Peterson, the lawyer, first, explained the situation carefully, leaving out details about the vault, but describing the intimidation, the threats. Peterson listened, then sighed deeply. Marcus, I'm going to be honest with you. These people, if they're who I think they are, they don't make empty threats. I've been practicing law in this county for 32 years. I've seen things, heard things. There are families here with reach beyond what you'd imagine. So I should just give up? Let them have it? I'm saying you need protection, real protection, not local cops, not county sheriffs, federal, the FBI, or Justice Department, someone outside the local system. But Marcus, you need to understand. Going that route, you're committing to a fight, a long, dangerous fight, and you have Sophie to consider. Marcus looked out the window at the ocean, at the waves that just kept coming no matter what. She's exactly why I need to fight. That evening, after picking Sophie up from school and making her favorite dinner, mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, Marcus called the FBI field office in Portland, explained that he had information about organized crime, money laundering, and possible connections to unsolved disappearances. The agent who answered sounded bored until Marcus mentioned the amounts involved. $310 million got people's attention. They scheduled a meeting for Friday morning, 2 days away, 2 days inside Westwood's deadline. Marcus spent Thursday fortifying the house. He installed better locks, motion sensors, additional cameras, called a security company in Newport, and paid for 24-hour monitoring, something he couldn't afford but couldn't afford not to have. Then he sat Sophie down and had the hardest conversation of his life. "Baby, I need you to listen carefully. If anyone you don't know tries to talk to you at school or on the playground or anywhere, you tell a teacher immediately. You don't talk to them. You don't go anywhere with them. You scream if you have to." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Why? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Daddy just wants you to be extra safe, okay? And if anything ever feels weird or scary, you call me right away. Promise?" "I promise." Her voice was small, frightened. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Marcus pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "No, baby, we're not in trouble. But some people want our house, and they're not being nice about it. So we need to be careful until it's all sorted out." "Can't we just give them the house? Find another one?" "This is our home now, and sometimes you have to stand up for what's yours, even when it's scary." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered against his chest. "Mommy would say you're being brave." "Mommy would tell me I'm an idiot for getting us into this mess." Sophie pulled back and looked at him seriously. "No, she wouldn't. She'd say you're doing the right thing. That's what she always said. Do the right thing even when it's hard." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't always notice." Friday morning, Marcus drove to Portland. Sophie stayed with Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who lived 2 miles down the road and had practically adopted them since they'd moved in. The drive took 2 hours, giving Marcus plenty of time to rehearse what he'd say, how much to reveal. He'd brought copies of everything: the journal, the ledgers, photographs of the vault, everything except the actual location, that he'd keep to himself until he knew he could trust these people. The FBI field office was in a nondescript building downtown, all concrete and tinted glass. Marcus checked in with security, got a visitor badge, and waited in a lobby that smelled like coffee and stress. After 20 minutes, a woman approached, mid-40s, dark suit, hair pulled back severely. She had the kind of face that gave nothing away. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Special Agent Sarah Morrison. Please follow me." They walked through corridors lined with office cubicles and conference rooms, finally entering a small interview room with a table, 3 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner. Another agent was already there, younger, male, taking notes on a laptop. "This is Agent Torres," Morrison said. "He'll be documenting our conversation. Before we begin, I need to ask, are you in immediate danger?" "I don't know. Maybe, yes." "Has anyone threatened you directly?" Marcus told them about Westwood's visit, about the references to Sophie, about the 48-hour deadline that had already passed. Torres typed rapidly. Morrison's expression never changed. "And what exactly do these people want?" she asked. "My property, or rather what's underneath it." "Which is?" Marcus pulled out the copies he'd made, slid them across the table. $310 million in bearer bonds, securities, gold and cash, hidden in a vault my uncle built in 1978 for them. Morrison picked up the documents slowly. Her eyes scanned the first page of the ledger, then the second. She looked at Raymond's journal entries, at the photographs. Her composure cracked just for a second. Jesus. My uncle spent 40 years guarding this for them, documented everything, names, dates, amounts, it's all there. Torres had stopped typing. He was staring at the photographs of the vault, his mouth slightly open. Morrison set the papers down carefully. "Mr. Holloway, if this is authentic, and I'm not saying it isn't, but if it is, You've just walked into the middle of one of the largest unsolved money laundering cases in Pacific Northwest history. We've had suspicions, fragments of information, but nothing concrete, nothing actionable. So you can help me. We can investigate, but I need you to understand something. These people, whoever they are, they've operated successfully for over 40 years. That doesn't happen without serious resources, serious connections. Going after them means exposing yourself to significant risk. They already know where I live. They know everything about me and my daughter. I'm already exposed. Morrison nodded slowly. Then we need to act fast. First, you and your daughter need protection. Witness protection isn't appropriate yet, but we can arrange for surveillance, regular check-ins. Second, we need to verify everything you've shown us. That means accessing the vault, documenting the contents, establishing chain of custody. When? As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if we can arrange it. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or just exhaustion. Okay, tomorrow. They spent 3 more hours going over everything. Morrison asked detailed questions about the house, the vault's location, the security measures, the people Marcus had encountered. Torres documented it all. By the time Marcus left, the sun was setting and his head was pounding. The drive back to Lincoln City felt longer than the drive up. He kept checking the rearview mirror, watching for tails. Saw nothing, but that meant less than it used to. These people were professionals. If they wanted to follow him, he'd never know. He picked Sophie up from Mrs. Chen's house just after 8. She ran to him and hugged his legs, and he realized how much he'd missed her, even for just a day. "Did you fix everything?" she asked. "Working on it, baby." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ocean outside. Every sound made him tense, every creak of the house settling, every gust of wind, every distant car engine. Around 2 in the morning, his phone buzzed. A notification from the security system. Motion detected, front driveway. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the camera feed. 3 figures moving toward the house, not bothering to hide now, not pretending anymore. Marcus's heart rate spiked. He crept to Sophie's room, shook her awake gently. "Baby, we need to go. Right now. Quietly." She was confused, half asleep, but she'd learned not to question when he used that tone. He grabbed her coat, helped her into shoes, took her hand. They went out the back door, the one facing the cliff, and moved along the narrow path that ran parallel to the edge. The drop to the rocks below was 200 feet, sheer and deadly, but there was enough moonlight to see by, enough path to follow. Behind them, glass shattered. They were inside the house. Marcus pulled Sophie faster, trying not to think about the cliff edge inches away. They reached the neighbor's property, Mrs. Chen's little cottage with its yellow porch light. He pounded on the door. Mrs. Chen answered in her bathrobe, took one look at Marcus's face, and pulled them inside without questions. "What's happening?" "Call 911. Tell them there's a break-in at Windward Point. Armed intruders." She picked up her phone immediately. Marcus crouched by the window, watching his house in the distance. Flashlight beams moved inside, visible through the windows. They were searching, systematic and thorough. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The sheriff's department arrived 12 minutes later. 2 cars, lights blazing, sirens cutting through the night. By then, the intruders were gone, just vanished into the darkness like they'd never been there. Marcus gave his statement to a deputy who looked barely out of high school, describing 3 men, dark clothes, no visible weapons. The kid wrote it all down dutifully, but Marcus could see the skepticism in his eyes. "You say nothing was taken?" the deputy asked. Marcus had checked. The house was ransacked, drawers pulled out, furniture moved, But the hidden door to the vault was untouched. They hadn't found it. Nothing's missing. Sometimes transients break into vacation homes looking for cash or electronics. Probably just bad luck. Marcus wanted to scream. Instead, he said, "Probably." The deputies left around 4 in the morning. Advised Marcus to install better locks, maybe get a dog. Said they'd increase patrols in the area. Marcus knew they wouldn't. Knew this was already being written off as a random incident, nothing to investigate further. Sophie stayed with Mrs. Chen. Marcus went back to the house alone as dawn broke over the ocean. The place felt violated. Everything they'd built, the safety they'd tried to create, all shattered in one night. He cleaned up mechanically, putting furniture back, sweeping broken glass. His hands moved, but his mind was somewhere else, cycling through options, through possibilities. They'd come to his house, broken in while his daughter slept, crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His phone rang. Agent Morrison. "We heard about the incident last night," she said without preamble. "Are you and your daughter safe?" For now, they didn't find what they were looking for. "Mr. Holloway, I'm accelerating our timeline. I'll be there this afternoon with a team. We're going to secure the vault, document everything, and get you and Sophie into protective custody." "I don't want to leave. It's not optional anymore. They've escalated. Next time, they might not run when the cops show up." Marcus looked around his home, at Sophie's drawings still taped to the walls, at the life they'd been trying to build. "When?" 3 p.m. Pack what you need for a few days." After she hung up, Marcus sat on the couch and let himself feel it. The fear, the anger, the crushing weight of having put his daughter in danger. Emma would have known what to do. Emma always knew. But she was gone, and he was alone, and he'd made choices that had brought armed men to their door in the middle of the night. Around noon, there was a knock. Marcus tensed, hand moving toward the baseball bat he'd propped by the door. But when he checked the camera, he saw Carl Dietrich, the old man from the diner. And he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a handful of other townspeople. Mrs. Chen, the hardware store owner, a woman Marcus recognized from the post office, even the deputy who'd taken his statement last night. He opened the door slowly. Carl spoke first. "We heard what happened. Figured you could use some support." Marcus blinked. "I don't understand." "This town's got a long memory," the hardware store owner said. His name was Jack, Marcus remembered now. "We know about Windward Point. Known for 40 years something was wrong up here. Known Raymond was protecting something." The woman from the post office stepped forward. "My brother was David Chen. He disappeared in 81 after he started asking questions about this property. They said it was suicide. I never believed it." "We've all lost someone," Carl said quietly, "or known someone who did. But we were too scared to stand up, too worried about what they'd do. Then you showed up, and you didn't run, and we figured maybe it was time we stopped being scared too." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Mrs. Chen patted his arm. "Just let us help. Jack here's going to install a proper security system. Claire's husband is a lawyer, he's looking into legal protections. And all of us, we're going to make sure you and Sophie are watched over. They want to come back. They'll have to go through the whole neighborhood." For the first time in days, Marcus felt something other than fear. He felt hope. They worked all afternoon. Jack installed motion sensors and better cameras. Claire's husband went through Marcus's documentation and made copies, stored them in a safe deposit box at 3 different banks. The deputy, whose name was Ryan, admitted quietly that not everyone in the sheriff's department was compromised. He knew 3 other deputies who'd been investigating irregularities in old case files, disappearances that were never properly investigated. They'd been waiting for something concrete, something they could act on without getting shut down. "When the FBI comes through," Ryan said, "we'll support however we can. Provide local intel, help with security, whatever you need." Agent Morrison arrived at 3 sharp with 4 other agents and 2 vehicles. She assessed the situation quickly, took in the townspeople, the security improvements, the coordinated support. Marcus saw something shift in her expression. Respect, maybe. "Mr. Holloway, it looks like you've built yourself an army," she said. "They built themselves," Marcus replied. "I just gave them a reason." They went down to the vault together, Morrison and 2 other agents. Marcus showed them how to access the hidden door, how to operate the elevator. He watched their faces as they descended, as they saw what Raymond had protected for 40 years. They didn't speak for a long time, just walked between the containers, reading labels, checking documentation, photographing everything. "This is bigger than I thought," Morrison finally said. "This isn't just money laundering. These documents tie back to cases we've had open for decades: corruption, racketeering, possibly murder. If we can authenticate all of this, connect it to current operations, we're looking at dozens of indictments, major players. How long will that take? Months, maybe longer. We'll need to verify every document, trace every transaction, build an airtight case. In the meantime, you're a witness, a critical witness, which means you're also a target." "So what do we do?" Morrison looked at him directly. "You've already done it. You've documented everything, built community support, brought in federal oversight. Now you let us do our job. We'll station agents in the area, provide regular security sweeps. But Mr. Holloway, I need you to understand. These people don't give up easily. They've already shown they're willing to escalate. You and Sophie need to be extremely careful." "We will be." They worked until after midnight, the agents cataloging and photographing. When they finally emerged, the house was dark except for porch lights, but Marcus could see figures in the neighboring properties, people staying up, keeping watch. His army, as Morrison had called them. Over the next week, things began to change. The FBI established a satellite office in Lincoln City. Agents rotated through regular shifts, visible and obvious. The message was clear. This case was federal now, beyond the reach of local corruption. Some deputies transferred out suddenly. A county judge announced early retirement. People who'd had power for decades suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. And through it all, Marcus and Sophie stayed at Windward Point. The house that had been Raymond's prison became their fortress. Sophie went back to school with an agent assigned to watch the building. Marcus started working again, taking small contracting jobs locally, always with his phone close, always watching. The threats didn't stop completely. Anonymous calls in the middle of the night, messages left on his windshield. Once, someone spray-painted "traitor" across his driveway. But each time something happened, the community responded. Neighbors painted over the graffiti. The hardware store donated a new mailbox when his was destroyed. The post office started screening his mail for suspicious packages. Marcus had come to Windward Point looking for nothing more than a cheap place to live. Instead, he'd found something he hadn't even known he'd lost. Purpose, community. The strength to stand up not just for himself, but for everyone who'd been silenced before him. Raymond's burden had become his mission, and he wouldn't stop until every secret buried beneath that house had been brought into the light. Because some things were worth fighting for. And at the top of that list was an 8-year-old girl who believed her father was brave, even when he was terrified, who trusted him to do the right thing, even when the easy thing would have been to run. Sophie deserved better than a life lived in fear. She deserved the truth. And Marcus Holloway, widowed father and accidental whistleblower, was going to make sure she got it. The story broke on a Tuesday morning in early December. Agent Morrison had warned Marcus it was coming, but nothing could have prepared him for the scale of it. The headline ran across every major news site. Massive corruption vault discovered in Oregon, $310 million in laundered assets hidden for 40 years. By noon, the driveway to Windward Point was clogged with news vans. Helicopters circled overhead. Reporters shouted questions through camera lenses, their voices carrying on the winter wind. Marcus kept Sophie home from school that day. They sat together on the couch, watching their quiet life explode into something unrecognizable. The local news showed footage of the house, of FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence, of Agent Morrison giving a press conference in Portland. She was careful with her words, revealing enough to shock but holding back details that could compromise the investigation. A single individual came forward with extraordinary courage, Morrison said into a forest of microphones. Despite significant personal risk, despite threats to himself and his family, he chose to expose a criminal enterprise that has operated in the shadows for over 4 decades. Because of his actions, we now have evidence linking this cache to numerous unsolved cases, including several suspicious disappearances in the 1970s and 80s. The reporters erupted with questions. Morrison answered some, deflected others, but the core message was clear: someone had been brave enough to stand up, and the dominoes were starting to fall. By that evening, names were being named. Michael Benedetti, son of Carlo Benedetti, was served with a federal subpoena at his real estate office in Portland. Anthony Benedetti, his brother, was detained at the airport trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. 3 current county employees were placed on administrative leave. A retired judge was brought in for questioning. Marcus's phone rang constantly. Reporters offering money for interviews, producers pitching documentary deals, lawyers volunteering their services. He ignored most of it, but he did take one call from a journalist named Rebecca Parks. She'd spent 15 years investigating organized crime in the Pacific Northwest and had written extensively about corruption cases no one else would touch. "Mr. Holloway," she said when Marcus finally answered, "I've been chasing this story for a decade. Pieces of it, fragments. What you've done, bringing this into the light, it's remarkable. But I need to warn you, the people you've exposed, they don't go down quietly." "I'm aware. Are you? Because from what I'm seeing, you've got federal protection, community support, media attention. That's all good. But attention fades, agents get reassigned, and these families, they think in generations. They're patient, they wait." Marcus watched Sophie in her room, drawing pictures with colored pencils. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying don't get comfortable. Don't assume this is over just because the story broke. The real battle is just beginning." She was right. The backlash started within 48 hours. Editorials appeared in the local paper questioning Marcus's motives. Anonymous sources suggested he'd planted the evidence himself, trying to profit from the notoriety. Someone leaked his financial records showing the credit card debt, the late payments, implying he was desperate for money, insinuating he'd fabricated everything for a payout. Then came the lawsuits. The Benedetti family filed a civil suit claiming the vault's contents were legally obtained assets their father had stored with Raymond's permission. They demanded Marcus return everything, plus damages for emotional distress. Their lawyers were from a firm in San Francisco that specialized in defending white-collar criminals, expensive, connected, ruthless. Marcus's court-appointed attorney was overwhelmed within a week. He sat across from Marcus in a coffee shop in Newport, papers spread across the table looking like he hadn't slept in days. "They're drowning us in motions," he admitted. "Discovery requests, depositions, procedural challenges. I don't have the resources to fight this kind of legal war. You need a bigger firm. Someone with deep pockets and experience with federal racketeering cases. I can't afford that." "I know, but maybe you don't have to." He slid a business card across the table. "Whitmore and Associates, Seattle. They called me yesterday, said they've been following the case. They're willing to represent you pro bono. They specialize in whistleblower protection and asset recovery. This is exactly their kind of case." Marcus stared at the card. Why would they work for free? Because if the government seizes the vault's assets as proceeds of criminal activity, which they will, there's a whistleblower reward, typically 10 to 30% of recovered funds. You'd be entitled to that. And the firm would take a percentage of your reward as their fee. It's a gamble for them, but a calculated one. 10% of $310 million. Marcus's mind couldn't even process that number. $31 million. It was absurd, impossible. More money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. "I didn't do this for money," he said quietly. "I know. But you deserve to be compensated for the risk you took, for what you're still taking. And frankly, you'll need resources if you want to survive what's coming." Marcus met with the lawyers from Whitmore and Associates the following Monday. They flew down to Lincoln City in a private plane, 3 attorneys in perfect suits carrying leather briefcases that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent used to. They set up in a conference room at the local library, spread out documents, and got to work. The lead attorney was a woman named Catherine Whitmore, early 60s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed everything in 2 hours, asking sharp questions, taking detailed notes. When she finished, she sat back and looked at Marcus directly. "Mr. Holloway, I'm going to be blunt. You've done something extraordinary. You've also painted a target on your back that won't disappear anytime soon. The Benedetti family is desperate. They know if the government proves those assets are criminal proceeds, they lose everything. So they're going to fight dirty. Character assassination, intimidation, legal harassment. They'll drag this out for years if they can. What's my alternative? We fight back harder. We go on offense. We don't just defend against their lawsuits. We file our own, wrongful death suits on behalf of the families whose loved ones disappeared. Thomas Sullivan, David Chen, the others. We use the evidence in that vault to connect the Benedetti family to those crimes. We make them defend on multiple fronts until they're buried." "Will that work?" Catherine smiled thinly. "It'll make them wish they'd never heard your name, but more importantly, it'll tie up their resources, force them to focus on survival rather than revenge. And it'll send a message. You're not an easy target. You're a threat." Over the next month, the legal machinery ground into motion. Catherine's firm filed wrongful death suits totaling $400 million against the Benedetti family, their associates, and several shell corporations linked to the laundered money. They subpoenaed decades of financial records. They deposed former employees, tracked down witnesses who'd been too scared to talk before, built a case that connected Raymond's vault to a criminal enterprise spanning multiple states and 40 years. The media coverage intensified. 60 Minutes sent a crew to interview Marcus. He sat in his living room with the ocean visible through the windows behind him and told Raymond's story. Told about the journal entries, the 40 years of imprisonment, the courage it took to document everything knowing he might never be free. Told about finding the vault, about the threats, about choosing to stand up instead of run. "Why didn't you just take the money?" the interviewer asked. "You could have sold one bond, walked away with $10,000, and no one would have known." Marcus thought about that. "My daughter, Sophie, she's 8, and every day she watches what I do, how I handle things. I realized she was learning from me, learning what it means to make choices, and I couldn't teach her that some things are okay to ignore just because they're inconvenient or dangerous. My wife, before she died, she used to say you do the right thing even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I think she'd want Sophie to learn that too." The interview aired on a Sunday evening. 63 million people watched it. The next morning, donations started pouring into a legal defense fund Catherine's firm had established. $5, $10, $100. People from across the country sending what they could to support a single father who'd chosen truth over safety. Within a week, the fund had raised $2 million, enough to sustain the legal fight for years if necessary. But it wasn't just money. Letters arrived by the thousands. People sharing their own stories of standing up to corruption, of choosing integrity over convenience. Families who'd lost loved ones to unsolved crimes thanking Marcus for giving them hope. children writing to Sophie, telling her how brave her dad was. The pile of mail grew so large the post office had to deliver it in bins. Sophie read some of the letters with Marcus. One night they sat together on the couch, going through cards and drawings sent by kids her age. One letter particularly struck her. It was from a girl in Ohio named Melissa, 9 years old. Dear Sophie, my mum says your dad is a hero. My dad died 3 years ago. He worked for a company that was doing bad things. He told people about it and they fired him. He was really sad for a long time. But he told me before he died that he was proud he told the truth, even though it was hard. I think your dad is like my dad. Tell him thank you for being brave. Love, Melissa. Sophie looked up at Marcus with tears in her eyes. Daddy, did we do the right thing? Yeah, baby, I think we did. As winter turned to spring, the legal proceedings intensified. Depositions, hearings, motions. Marcus spent more time in courtrooms than in his workshop, but slowly the case began to turn in their favor. Key witnesses flipped, offering testimony in exchange for immunity. Financial experts traced the laundered money to specific crimes. The paper trail Raymond had meticulously maintained became an unbreakable chain of evidence. Then, in April, the government filed formal charges. 37 counts of racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. 23 individuals were named, including both Benedetti brothers, 5 county officials, 2 retired judges, and a sitting state senator. The indictments were staggering in scope, detailing a criminal enterprise that had corrupted every level of local government for over 40 years. Marcus sat in the courtroom gallery during the arraignment, watching powerful men in expensive suits stand before a judge and plead not guilty. Their confidence was shaken now. You could see it in the way they held themselves, in the nervous glances they exchanged. They'd operated in shadows for so long, untouchable, invincible. Now they stood in fluorescent light, exposed. Michael Benedetti's eyes found Marcus across the courtroom. For a long moment they stared at each other. Marcus didn't look away, didn't flinch. He'd spent months being afraid. He was done with fear. The trial was scheduled for August. Catherine warned Marcus it would be brutal, that he'd be the prosecution's star witness, that the defense would try to tear him apart on the stand. Marcus prepared himself, met with federal prosecutors weekly, reviewed documents until he could recite them from memory, practiced staying calm under hostile questioning. But something else was happening too, something Catherine hadn't anticipated. The town was changing. Lincoln City had spent decades pretending Windward Point didn't exist, that Raymond Holloway was just a harmless recluse, that the disappearances were tragic accidents. Now they couldn't pretend anymore. The truth was public, the corruption exposed, and that meant healing could finally begin. The Chen family, who'd lost David in 1981, filed their own lawsuit using evidence from the vault. They won a settlement of $8 million from the Benedetti estate. The Sullivan family did the same. So did 3 others. Families who'd spent decades wondering what happened to their loved ones finally had answers, finally had justice. And the money, the $310 million sitting in federal custody, became the subject of intense negotiation. The government argued it should be forfeited to the Treasury. Catherine argued that her clients, the victim families, deserved restitution. A judge appointed a special master to determine fair distribution. In June, the ruling came down. The government would seize $200 million for forfeiture. $40 million would go to victim families as restitution. $20 million would cover legal fees and administrative costs, and the remaining $50 million would be divided between the Whistleblower Reward Fund and community reparations. Marcus's share of the whistleblower reward came to $15 million. After taxes and legal fees, he'd walk away with roughly $9 million. It was more money than he'd ever imagined having. More money than seemed real. He sat with Sophie and explained it to her as best he could. They were sitting on the cliff behind the house, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and purple. The same view Raymond must have watched for 40 years. "So we're rich?" Sophie asked. "I guess so, yeah." "Will we move?" Marcus looked at the house, at the home they'd built from Raymond's prison. "Do you want to?" Sophie thought about it, kicking her legs over the edge of the cliff. "I like it here. I like my school. I like Mrs. Chen. And the ocean." "Me too. But Daddy, can we use the money to help people, like how people helped us?" Marcus pulled her close. "Absolutely. That's exactly what we're going to do." Over the summer, while waiting for the trial to begin, Marcus established the Raymond Holloway Foundation. Its mission was to support whistleblowers and their families, to provide legal protection and financial resources to people who chose truth over safety. The initial endowment was $3 million from Marcus's settlement. The foundation hired staff, opened an office in Portland, started taking cases. The first family they helped was from Texas. A single mother who'd exposed environmental violations at a chemical plant and lost her job. The foundation paid her legal fees, covered her living expenses while she fought her wrongful termination case, helped her find new employment. Within 6 months, they'd helped 40 families across the country. But Marcus didn't stop there. He used another $2 million to establish a community fund in Lincoln City. Grants for small businesses, scholarships for local students, renovations for the elementary school. The town that had tried to ignore Windward Point's secrets now benefited from them being exposed. It was uncomfortable for some people. The mayor, who'd served for 30 years, resigned rather than face questions about what he'd known. But most people embraced the change, embraced the idea that their town could be better, honest, clean. The trial began on August 15th. It lasted 9 weeks. Marcus testified for 3 days straight. The defense attorneys were brutal, just as Catherine had warned. They questioned his motives, his finances, his character. They suggested he'd been conspiring with Raymond all along, that he'd known about the vault before he inherited the property. They showed the jury his credit card debt, his late payments, painted him as desperate and dishonest. But Marcus held firm. He told the truth simply, clearly. Showed the jury Raymond's journal in his uncle's handwriting. Walked them through the timeline of discovery, of threats, of choosing to come forward despite everything. And most powerfully, he introduced them to the families. To David Chen's sister, who'd spent 42 years wondering what happened to her brother. To Thomas Sullivan's widow, who'd raised 3 kids alone, never knowing her husband had been murdered. Their testimony was devastating. The jury deliberated for 6 days. Marcus waited at Windward Point, unable to focus on anything. Sophie tried to keep him distracted with board games and walks along the cliff. Mrs. Chen brought meals they barely touched. The waiting was its own kind of torture. On the 6th day, Catherine called. "They've reached a verdict." Marcus's hands shook as he drove to the courthouse. The parking lot was packed with news vans, reporters, protesters both supporting and condemning the defendants. He pushed through the crowd, found his seat in the gallery. Sophie sat beside him, holding his hand tight. The jury filed in. Marcus tried to read their faces but saw nothing. The judge asked for the verdict. The forewoman stood. "On count 1 racketeering, we find the defendants guilty." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. The forewoman continued through all 37 counts. Guilty, 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 every single charge. The Benedetti brothers sat frozen, their lawyers already preparing appeals. The other defendants showed more emotion. One woman sobbed. A former county clerk turned and stared at Marcus with pure hatred. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Michael Benedetti received 35 years. Anthony got 40. The others received sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years. It wasn't enough. No sentence could replace the lives stolen, the families destroyed. But it was something. It was justice. Partial, imperfect, but real. Outside the courthouse, Marcus gave a brief statement to the press. He thanked the prosecutors, the investigators, the FBI agents who'd worked the case. He thanked Catherine and her firm. He thanked the community that had protected him and Sophie. And he thanked Raymond. "My uncle spent 40 years trapped by fear and circumstance," Marcus said, his voice steady now. "He documented everything, preserved every piece of evidence, hoping someone would eventually use it. He couldn't find the courage to act himself, but he made it possible for someone else to act. He gave me the tools, and I hope wherever he is, he knows his burden is finally lifted, that the secrets he protected are exposed, that justice, after 4 decades, has arrived." That night, Marcus and Sophie sat on the cliff, watching stars emerge over the ocean. The house behind them glowed with warm light. Inside, friends were gathered. Mrs. Chen, Jack from the hardware store, Agent Morrison, Catherine, Ryan the deputy. They were celebrating not just the verdict, but survival, transformation, rebirth. "Daddy," Sophie said quietly, "do you think Mommy would be proud?" Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "Yeah, baby, I think she'd be very proud. I think Uncle Raymond would be proud too, even though we never met him." "I think you're right." Sophie leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence. The ocean continued its endless rhythm below, waves crashing against ancient rock. Some things never changed, but some things, with enough courage and stubbornness and faith, could transform completely. Over the following months, Windward Point became something Marcus never expected. A symbol. People started making pilgrimages to see it, to stand on the cliff where one man's courage had brought down an empire of corruption. The house itself remained Marcus and Sophie's home, private and protected, but the land around it, the acres overlooking the Pacific, Marcus opened to the public. He built a small memorial garden on the hillside, stones engraved with the names of those who'd disappeared: Thomas Sullivan, David Chen, Jerry McDonald, Lisa Warren, Robert Torres. 7 names in total, 7 lives stolen. Families came to visit, to leave flowers, to finally have a place to mourn. The garden became sacred ground. The vault itself was sealed permanently. Catherine argued successfully that it should be preserved as a historical site, evidence of how corruption operates, how it hides, how it persists across generations. The elevator shaft was gated and locked, accessible only to researchers and historians with proper clearance. But the story of what was found there that belonged to everyone. Sophie thrived in ways Marcus hadn't imagined possible. The trauma of losing her mother didn't disappear. She still had hard days, still cried for Emma, still woke up sometimes from nightmares. But she was healing, growing. She joined the art club at school, made friends, laughed more. She started therapy again, this time with a grief counselor who specialized in children who'd lost parents. Slowly, carefully, she rebuilt herself. And she was proud. Proud of what her father had done, yes, but also proud of herself. Proud that she'd been brave when she was scared. Proud that she'd stood by him even when things got dangerous. She wrote about it in an essay for school, about courage and family and doing the right thing. The essay won a state competition. She read it aloud at an assembly, her voice clear and strong, and Marcus sat in the audience and cried. But there were quiet moments too. Moments when the weight of everything pressed down, and Marcus wondered if he'd made the right choices. One evening in late autumn, almost a year after the verdict, he found himself in Raymond's old bedroom. He'd left it mostly untouched, a time capsule of his uncle's life. The clothes still hung in the closet. The books still lined the shelves. A pair of reading glasses sat on the nightstand, waiting for eyes that would never return. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and picked up one of the books. It was a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, pages yellowed and dog-eared. Inside the front cover, Raymond had written a note in pencil, faded but still readable. Courage is not a man with a gun in his hand. It's knowing you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what. Atticus was right. I wish I'd understood that sooner. RMH 1984. Marcus sat there for a long time, holding the book, understanding his uncle in a way he hadn't before. Raymond had known what courage looked like, had read about it, thought about it, carried those words with him for decades. But fear had kept him frozen. Fear and isolation, and the weight of terrible choices made when he was young and desperate. Marcus thought about his own fear, the nights he'd lain awake terrified for Sophie's safety, the moments he'd almost walked away, almost taken the money and run. He'd been afraid every single day. But he'd done it anyway. That was the difference. That was what Raymond's 40 years of documentation had been building toward. A second chance. An opportunity for someone else to finish what he couldn't. I understand now, Marcus said to the empty room. You weren't weak. You were just alone. And that's the hardest thing to be brave through. He placed the book back on the nightstand and stood. Through the window, he could see Sophie in the memorial garden, placing fresh flowers on the stones. She did that every week now, had taken it upon herself to maintain the space, to honor the people whose names were carved there. She was 10 years old and understood something about legacy that most adults never grasped. Marcus walked outside and joined her. They stood together among the stones, watching the sun descend toward the horizon. Daddy, Sophie said, when I grow up, I want to work at the foundation, help people like you did. Marcus's chest tightened. You sure about that? It's not always easy work. Nothing important is easy. That's what you taught me. He pulled her close, this brave, brilliant child who'd lost so much and still chose hope. Your mom would be so proud of who you're becoming. I miss her, Sophie said quietly, every day. Me too, baby. Me too. They stood there as the light changed, as the ocean turned from blue to silver to gold, and Marcus realized something profound. Emma's death had broken him, almost destroyed him, but it had also led him here, to this cliff, to this moment, to a purpose he never would have found otherwise. The grief would never fully heal, but it had transformed into something else, into action, into meaning. You know what's strange? Sophie said. If we hadn't lost Mom, we never would have needed a cheap place to live. We never would have come here, never would have found the vault. All those families would still be wondering what happened. Marcus had thought the same thing countless times. The chain of events that seemed random but led inexorably to this moment. Emma's death, his desperation, the inheritance, the discovery. If any single element had been different, Raymond's secret would have died with him. The Benedettis would have continued operating. The families would never have known. Life's strange that way, Marcus said. Sometimes the worst thing that happens leads to something important. Do you think Mom knows, wherever she is? I think she knows, and I think she's glad we didn't let the grief win, that we kept going, kept fighting. By the 1-year anniversary of the vault's discovery, the Raymond Holloway Foundation had helped 237 whistleblowers and their families. They'd secured legal victories in 48 cases. They'd protected witnesses, provided security, funded therapy for traumatized children. The work was making a difference, real, measurable difference. Marcus split his time between the foundation and smaller, quieter work. He still took contracting jobs locally, still fixed broken things with his hands, found comfort in the simplicity of carpentry, of plumbing, of problems that could be solved with the right tools and enough patience. He didn't need to work anymore. The money from the settlement ensured he'd never need to work again. But work gave him purpose beyond the foundation, kept him grounded, kept him connected to the person he'd been before all of this. One Saturday morning in spring, 2 years after everything began, Marcus was replacing the deck boards on the back porch when a car pulled into the driveway. He looked up, instinctively tense but relaxed when he recognized the driver. It was Claire from the post office, the woman whose brother had been David Chen. She got out slowly, carrying something wrapped in cloth. She'd aged since the trial, her hair grayer, her movements stiffer, but her eyes were bright, clear, at peace in a way they hadn't been before. "Marcus," she said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Coffee." They sat on the newly repaired deck, looking out at the ocean. Claire unwrapped the cloth to reveal a photograph in a simple wooden frame. It showed a young man, maybe 25, standing next to a motorcycle. He was grinning, his whole life ahead of him. "This is David," she said. 1981, 3 weeks before he disappeared. I found it in storage last week. Wanted you to have it." Marcus took the frame carefully. "Claire, I can't." "You gave me my brother back," she said, her voice breaking. "Not physically. I'll never have that. But you gave me the truth. You gave me justice. You gave me a place to say goodbye." She gestured toward the memorial garden visible on the hillside. "That's everything, so please, take this. Put it somewhere in your house. Let David be part of the home that exposed the people who took him from us." Marcus hung the photograph in the hallway, next to the framed copy of Raymond's final journal entry. Two men, decades apart, connected by tragedy and courage. He looked at them both often, reminded himself why all of it had mattered. Sophie turned 10 that summer. They threw a party on the beach below the house, invited every kid from her class, adults from town who'd become like family. Mrs. Chen made a cake shaped like a lighthouse. Jack brought fireworks. Agent Morrison came, now reassigned to Seattle but still checking in regularly. Catherine sent a gift, a college savings bond that would mature when Sophie turned 18. As the sun set and the kids played in the waves, Marcus stood with Ryan the deputy, watching. Ryan had been promoted to sergeant after the trial, part of a departmental reorganization that had cleared out the corruption. "You ever regret it?" Ryan asked. "The whole thing, how hard it was." Marcus thought about it, thought about the fear, the threats, the nights he couldn't sleep, thought about almost losing Sophie, almost losing everything. But then he thought about the families who finally had answers, about the foundation helping people across the country, about Sophie running through the waves, happy and free and healing. "No," he said, "I don't regret it." "You changed this town, you know, changed the whole county. People talk different now, hold their officials accountable, demand transparency. You started something." "Raymond started it. I just finished it." Ryan shook his head. "Raymond documented it. You made it matter. There's a difference." That night, after everyone had gone home and Sophie was asleep, Marcus walked down to the memorial garden. The sun had set, but the sky still glowed faintly purple. He stood by the stone that bore Raymond's name, added just last month after the final legal proceedings concluded. "We did it," Marcus said quietly to the stone, to the ocean, to the wind. "It's done. People know, and they're safe now. All of them." He thought he felt something then. Not supernatural, nothing dramatic, just a sense of completion, of a burden lifted. Raymond had carried his secret for 40 years. Marcus had carried it for 2, and now it belonged to history, to the public record, to everyone and no one. He walked back to the house, to his daughter sleeping safely in her room, to the life they'd built from ruins and courage. The lights were on inside, warm and welcoming. Home. Not despite everything that had happened here, but because of it. Anyone can change their life if they're willing to stand up when it matters. Anyone can choose courage over comfort, truth over safety. It won't be easy. The powerful don't surrender power quietly. The corrupt don't expose themselves willingly. But every system of injustice depends on silence, on people being too afraid to speak, too tired to fight, too isolated to believe they matter. Marcus Holloway was a widowed father living paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt, just trying to keep his daughter fed and sheltered. He wasn't looking for heroism, wasn't prepared for battle. But when the moment came, when the choice presented itself, he chose to stand. And that choice rippled outward in ways he never could have imagined. Families found peace, criminals faced justice, a community healed, and a foundation emerged that would protect other whistleblowers for generations to come. Because that's what courage does. It multiplies, it inspires, it creates permission for others to be brave too. The cliff at Windward Point still stands, waves still crash against ancient rock, and the house that once held Raymond's lonely vigil now shelters a father and daughter building something new. They're not running anymore, not hiding. They stand at the edge of the ocean and remember that some secrets are too important to keep, that some burdens are meant to be shared, that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is also the most necessary. The vault is sealed now, the money redistributed, the criminals convicted, but the legacy continues in every person who visits that memorial garden and decides to speak their own truth. In every whistleblower the foundation protects. In every child who learns that integrity matters more than safety. In every parent who chooses to stand up so their children will know what courage looks like. As another dawn breaks over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Marcus stands on his deck with coffee in hand and watches the world wake up. Sophie will emerge soon, sleepy-eyed and hungry. They'll make pancakes together, the way they do every Sunday. They'll talk about school, about friends, about ordinary things, and later, maybe they'll walk down to the memorial garden. Maybe they'll talk about the extraordinary things, the way this ordinary house on an ordinary cliff became the place where one man's 40-year secret finally found its voice. Because for Marcus and Sophie and everyone they've inspired, the edge of that cliff isn't an ending. It's where everything truly began. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Click to discover them, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth is always worth fighting for.